Hi everyone, my name is Sheila. I'm a student at the College of Arts and Sciences and I study math with computer science. I want to start by taking a look at the wages in the greater Boston area. So here we actually have a graph of the annual compensation between job category between men and women in 2021. So this data is for the greater Boston area and it was collected by the Boston Women's Workforce Council. This data is incredibly useful in understanding the wage gap, so it's vital that this data is actually an accurate representation of the compensation in Boston. However, it's also really sensitive data. Not every company is okay with just releasing their data to the public or even one trusted individual or organization like the Boston Women's Workforce Council. And so this means that collecting this type of data is a really challenging problem. Thankfully, the Boston Women's Workforce Council really does a great job of collecting this data. They actually collect this data in such a way that not even they know what any of the company's salaries are. And so this way, companies provide their data without any fears about data privacy. Now, you might be wondering how the heck this is even possible. How do you compute something if you don't know any of the data or the numbers? And this is a really excellent question. So let's go through a really simple example of how they do this. So here we have 4 companies, and each has their own average salary for women. We're going to compute the average salary for women across these 4 companies. Like the Boston Women's Workforce Council, we're also going to have 2 servers that are going to help us out with this computation. So we're going to have each of the companies split their data into 2 pieces that add up to their original data. And from here, each company is going to send one piece to the white server and the other to the black server. Notice here that each server only sees half of the data pieces, so they don't actually know what any of the company's salaries are. At this point, the servers are going to take all their data pieces and sum them up. Here, they can just send them over to the other server, and each server is going to take both of these 2 pieces and add them up. This is actually the total sum of the salaries across these 4 companies, so to get the average, all we have to do is divide by 4. Pretty easy. Now, one question you should be asking yourself is, what happens if one of these servers is hacked? This is a really important thing to think about. Thankfully, the hacker will only see half of the data pieces, so they won't actually know what any of the company's data salaries actually are. What's more concerning is that they can actually manipulate some of these data pieces. So they can take, for example, this yellow -3 and turn it into a 9. And this is really bad because our original answer of 23 with this manipulation turns into a 35, and it's not an accurate representation of the wage gap or the average salaries anymore. So where do we go from here? Well, what we really need is a way to verify that this protocol was executed correctly and have a way to identify when the servers are cheating. This is a really challenging problem because of all the privacy that we're trying to protect. If we knew all the data, we could just do the computation ourselves and check our answers with the servers. But we don't have this data. So what can we do? Well, I've been working on this problem and come up with a way to do these types of computation using a new type of encryption that combines 3 special properties. The first of these properties is this additive property, and so this allows the addition of encrypted data without any sort of decryption. So if we have an encryption of 5 and an encryption of 2, we can add them up and we'll get an encryption of 7. The second property is this thresholding property, and this means that there are several unique decrypting keys. To decrypt anything, you need a certain number or threshold of these decryption keys. In this case, we're going to need 2 keys to decrypt any sort of encryption. The last property is this verifiable property. And so this means that whenever we decrypt something, we're going to get the data, but we're also going to get this special number R. And this number R, say if we're given this R, this data, and this encryption, we can actually verify that this encryption is an encryption of this black data. Most interestingly and importantly, is that if we're given some other data, say this blue data, we actually can't do the same verification process, and so we know that this black encryption is not an encryption of the blue data. And this will be very helpful in the verification process. Okay, so let's see how these 3 properties are going to work together. So we're going to have 3 phases: an input, computation, and verification phase. Like before, we're going to have our 4 companies with their data, and we're also going to have their 2 servers. We're now also going to have this public bulletin board, which is just where the companies and the servers are going to post their messages. This bulletin board is going to help us in the last phase. Okay, now we're going to give each server their own decrypting key, and from here, we're going to ask each company to encrypt their data and send it to the bulletin board. An important note here is that no one can actually read these encryptions. This is because only the servers have the decryption keys, and each server only has one, right? So because of the second property we talked about, they can't decrypt any of the data. At this point, the computation phase is done, and the companies can leave. Each server, now at this point, is going to retrieve all these color encryptions and sum them up using that first additive property that we talked about, and the result is going to be this encryption, which is the sum of all these colored encryptions. From here, the servers are going to work together, use both of their keys, and decrypt the data. And so they're going to post the results. So this consists of the decrypted data along with that special number R to the bulletin board. Now we have successfully computed the sum, and to get the average, like before, we just simply divide this number 23 by the number of companies or the number of color encryptions. Now we can move on to this verification phase. So like I hinted at before, we're going to be using this public bulletin board. And what we're going to do is we're going to retrieve all the color encryptions, sum them up, and get this little guy, which is the encryption of the sum. This is really similar to what the servers did, but the servers had the decryption keys, and we don't. So we're going to have to be a little bit more clever. And what we can actually do is that we can take advantage of that third property we talked about, the verifiable property. And like before, we have this encryption, and we also have this the decrypted data and that special number R. So we can verify that this encryption is an encryption of 23. In the case when one of the servers acted weird, they were evil and did something to change the answer that was posted to the bulletin board, say they posted a 35 along with that special number R, again, because of this verifiable property, we know that this black encryption is not an encryption of the number 35. And so from here, we can actually go ahead, audit the server, see what went wrong, and run this procedure again to get an accurate answer. The really cool thing about this is that it's not just an abstract idea or procedure. I've already actually taken this algorithm and built a working prototype. While it's not quite ready for production, this prototype provides a very clear path for the Boston Women's Workforce Council to implement a verifiable method for computing the wage gap in Boston. This code can be accessed by anyone over here in this code repository, so if you'd like to take a look, feel free. And that's pretty much it. I'd like to thank my advisor, Mayank Varia, who worked on this project a long time before I started working on this, and for supporting me for this entire year. And I'm happy to answer any questions right now, or if you'd like to find me afterwards, I'm happy to answer them then.
Fantastic work.
All right, so this seems like a really creative solution to a difficult problem. And could you just talk a little bit more about how that verification number R is generated from the data you have on that public bulletin board?
Yeah, so this is a really, really interesting problem that we had to think about. So normally when you do any sort of encryption, you use this randomness, which is why the number is an R. And there's special types of encryptions that allow you to recover this randomness when you do the decryption step. So we chose one of these types of encryption algorithms. And then from there, what we did to do this verification process is if you have some data, you have the randomness that was used to encrypt, the supposed encryption, you can just re-encrypt it and check if they're equal. So it sounds like a really complicated process, but it's actually pretty simple and pretty clever.
So obviously the wage gap is a really important question. I'm wondering, though, about the applicability of your approach to encrypting other forms of data. Is there anything specific to this particular question, or could it be used to protect data regarding any kind of challenge or problem?
Yeah, so this is definitely much more applicable than just salary data. These types of frameworks are really huge and very hot right now in the cryptography community. And I actually have a friend who's working on something similar to use this kind of frameworks for museums. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing with museums, but they are doing things like this. And actually, even things like the COVID exposure notifications use this kind of framework, because you have to, you don't want to tell other people that you're exposed, but it's still important for the general public to know who's exposed and who you exposed when, you contracted COVID.